It is likely that at the very moment President Kennedy was shot, a CIA officer was meeting with a Cuban agent in Paris and giving him an assassination device for use against Castro.
I believe it was a hypodermic syringe they'd given him with something called black leaf number 40 in it. This was in response to Amlash's request that he be provided some sort of a device whereby he could kill Castro. He returned this device to the case officer. The case officer brought it back to Washington, and that was the end of the plot.
Okay, but for purposes of discussion, the officer gave this Cuban, this agent in Paris, a device with that material you described in it. I presume the material, if injected into a human being, would kill him. Is that correct?
I would think so, yes.
So the agent gives the Cuban agent the device to kill somebody.
I'm sorry I didn't give him a pistol, because it would have made the whole thing a lot simpler and less exotic.
Well, whether it's a pistol or a needle, if Amlash is a political plot to destabilize the government, what in the blazes are we giving an agent a device that will kill Castro with for if it's not an assassination plot?
Well, if you want to have it that way, why don't you just have it that way?
Well, I don't want, it's not a question of what I want.
Oh, I think it is what you want, Mr. Dodd.
Mr. Helms, I'm reading to you from reports here, prepared at your request by the Inspector General.
I understand
I'm not fabricating this or creating out of all mine.
I understand that.
I'm quoting.
I understand that.
Well, it's not a question of what I want. It's a question of what this committee would like to know, and the committee is not satisfied, I don't believe at this point, as to exactly what the characterization of Amlash was.
Well, I've told you what I believe the characterization of Amlash to be.
Well, how does that jive with this?
If because we gave him a gun or a hypodermic syringe or whatever the case may be at his request because he had aims on Castro, if that is your definition of an assassination plot, then have it that way. That's quite satisfactory with me.
The committee found a certain irony in the fact that a poison pen device was being passed for the purpose of assassinating Castro on the very day that President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas.
Obviously, people had all kinds of crazy ideas, and everybody was worried about it being possibly inspired by the Soviets, possibly inspired by Castro. My own feeling is that Castro may be dumb, but he's not that dumb. I think he knew damn well that if there had been any kind of inkling that could literally prove that he was involved in something like this, I think Cuba would have been wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, it's that simple.
If there was a Cuban involvement in the assassination, it would be much more likely to be anti-Castro Cubans than pro-Castro Cubans. And there is also the possibility of some renegade CIA people being involved.
The Church Committee was never able to link President Kennedy with the assassination attempts on Castro, giving rise to the thought that the CIA may have been working on its own authority. In fact, the Church Committee found clear evidence of a conflicting initiative, that Kennedy was developing plans to normalize relations with Cuba. He was using State Department associate Bill Atwood as an intermediary.
Bill Atwood had been editor of Look magazine. He had, in that capacity, had gone to Cuba in 1959, interviewed Castro. He therefore had an interest in the relationship to the Castro problem.
He asked me what possibilities were there here for an interview in Cuba. And I said, well, that was possible, but I could not guarantee it. That would have to be communicated to my government. Well, in the end, an agenda was going to be drawn for discussion.
Atwood was given authorization by the president to pursue this exploration. He did so. Arrangements were made in the general sense that he might go to Cuba in December of 1963 and talk either to the foreign minister or possibly to Castro himself.
According to what Atwood told me, someone had told Atwood that the president had left a piece of paper on his desk saying that, when I return from Dallas, talk to me about your interview with the Cuban ambassador.
But at any rate, that was the shape of the exploration. I do not think for a moment that the people who endorsed this knew that the CIA was continuing to try to murder Castro.
Yeah, that's one track. He was working 2 tracks. And we always worked 2 tracks on lots of things. Cuba isn't the only country that I know of where we had 2 tracks. We had it in Chile in 1970. So 2 tracks is not unusual, and just because Kennedy was working with 1 track trying to make some friends with Castro if possible, we were trying to blow the hell out of him with the other hand.
The Church Committee was the first official investigative body to suggest that there may have been a conspiracy involved in the assassination of President Kennedy.
Among the other things, many other things we've been talking about tonight that jump out of this report, just a cursory reading, is the chilling possibility that all of our attempts and discussions about the assassination of Fidel Castro could have in some way triggered the murder of President Kennedy. Did that occur to you too, sir, as you went through all of this?
Of course it occurred to me. It occurred to all of us. We know that at one point, a few weeks before the assassination of President Kennedy, Mr. Castro himself issued a news release to the effect that if we didn't start leaving him alone, we'd learn that 2 could play the same game.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that Castro did it. We have no evidence to sustain such a charge, but it's a chilling thought.
Do you plan to examine it in any further detail?
We've gathered all the evidence we can in this field, and as long as the committee's alive, we'll look for more.
Shouldn't somebody be specifically exploring that question, don't you think?
Our committee was never given the authority to reinvestigate the assassination of President Kennedy.
After the Church Committee concluded its investigation into the CIA, a new momentum was building to reopen the investigation of Kennedy's assassination. It was being led by a group of young journalists, including a man named Geraldo Rivera, who broadcast the Zapruder film on television for the first time.
I'm telling you right straight out that if you are at all sensitive, if you're at all queasy, then don't watch this film. Just put on the late night movie because this is very heavy. It's the film shot by the Dallas dress manufacturer Abraham Zapruder, and it's the execution of President Kennedy. And Bob and Dick, would you please narrate what we're seeing as we show this film?
Now this is the Zapruder film.
Okay, so the cars are coming along now into Dealey Plaza?
Yes, these are the lead motorcycles of the motorcade.
All right, now with the President and Mrs. Kennedy is also Governor Connolly.
Right. Now, before he goes behind the sign, the President is waving to the crowd. When he comes out from behind the sign, he is shot, then Governor Connolly is shot.
He's already been hit.
He's already been hit.
And now?
And at the bottom of the screen, the headshot.
That's the shot that blew off his head. It's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in the movies.
Now, the Warren Commission said that all of the shots were fired from behind by Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone assassin, firing at the President. And as you can see, clearly, the head is thrown violently backwards.